be a lawyer?
Arguably, I don't really know, but I might have been.
Was that something in your family? Did your dad?
No.
Anything like that?
No. No, it's something that sort of evolved. Actually, after I became an adult, after I'd finished college, I developed an interest in law. I had an experience while I was in college defending my first moving violation traffic ticket.
College-wise, you went where?
Wayne University in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
It's now Wayne State, but yes, I had got my degree was mechanical engineering.
Little background. What'd your dad do for a living?
He was a teacher. He in education. He taught first in high school and later at in a junior college, and later finally ended up retiring from Tuskegee University.
Okay. Where were you born?
I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee,
Okay.
and spent some of my early years there, and some in a little town near where my father grew up in Richmond, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. So you then, what'd your mom do for a living?
She was qualified to teach, but she was a stay-at-home mom
Okay.
most of the time. Yeah.
What'd your family consist of?
My immediate family?
Yeah.
I was the only child.
So you're spoiled rotten.
Yes, absolutely.
Spoiled rotten by mom and dad. Dad's an educator. Your mom's staying at home, making sure you're comfortable.
Yes.
You got everything going for you. And then you graduate from high school.
Right.
What year were you born, John?
1934.
Okay, so you're born 1934. Do you have any corporate memory of December 7th, 1941?
Oh, absolutely.
What do you remember?
Well, the news, the Pearl Harbor. I was old enough to understand at some level what was going on, and I was very much aware of it, and World War II and all that went with that. I have reasonably vivid memories of World War II.
Did you hear it from the radio? Did your parents talk about it at all?
I really don't remember. I did hear it on the radio, and everybody was talking about it, really.
Yeah. What did that do for you as far as just living? You know, your rations. That was that time period. Do you recall anything changing in your life during that wartime?
Very much aware of rationing, food rationing, gasoline rationing. You know, getting the sticker, the A sticker, the B sticker, so forth. I was very much aware of all that. I was aware of what was going on during the war in terms of wins and losses, the invasion in Normandy, and the moving of troops in Europe, as well as, to some extent, what was going on in Japan. Less to a lesser extent what was going on in Japan and in that part of the world, but I was aware of it. I was aware of the newspapers. I remember the D-Day. People were anticipating D-Day, and I remember the newspaper, the front page of the newsletter paper had the word invasion, took up the top half of the page. I remember that, and but yes, people were universally involved in World War II. Unlike in subsequent wars, it affected everybody. And I think the country probably was much more united and much more involved than we have been since.
Mm-hmm. During that time period, where were you? Were you in Kentucky at that point, or were you in Tennessee?
I spent time both places for reasons that I don't fully understand. I sometimes spent time with my grandmother and her oldest daughter, who was unmarried. In my elementary school days, I would go back and forth between Kentucky and Tennessee. and Knoxville, Tennessee, where I was born. And
Were they segregated schools?
very much so.
Tell me about can you describe a little bit about how it was set up? Was it a one-room classroom, or your vision that kind of that, or did you have, how was it set up?
Well, generally speaking, it just was separate schools, separate neighborhoods, separate worlds to a great extent. It happens that my first school was indeed a two-room school, and my grandmother actually was the principal, and I started school. My mother, being a teacher, she really taught me first grade before I went to school, and so I started in the second grade and was always a grade ahead for that reason. But I went to school in this two-room school. It had 4 grades, and between that and Richmond, in Richmond, Kentucky, I went to the black school, or colored school they would have called that, and it went all the way from first grade through high school. And so I went back and forth between those schools during my elementary school years. Finally, and after the 6th grade, I went to junior high in Knoxville and high in Knoxville. And during that time, my father moved to his junior college teaching. And I joined him in Rock Hill, South Carolina for the last 3 years of high school.
So you're in South Carolina during the time of, just flashing through the Briggs Elliott, segregated school, or segregated school cases that were part of Brown versus Board, and because that was a South Carolina case. You would have no reason to know that, but that was a 1950, early 50s case that ultimately got consolidated in Brown versus.
Yeah, that was there before that.
Okay.
I graduated from high school in 51.
Okay, well.
So, but we were in a segregated school there, of course, and it again went from first grade through high school. Frame building, not brick. Very pot-bellied stoves in the classrooms for heat. Distinctly not an equal school in terms of the expression separate but equal. They were separate and they were far from equal, and that was where I graduated. So I graduated obviously before Brown, and the schools were upgraded. The states tried to upgrade the schools to make them appear more nearly equal as they saw the handwriting on the wall, but I experienced the more traditional separate and far from equal.
Did you feel a sense of minority, in a sense of treatment, or did you accept kind of that was the way it was? I mean, did you feel persecuted? I don't know if maybe that's a strong term, but felt different?
There was nothing subtle about segregation. There was nothing subtle about the fact that blacks did not enjoy anything like equality, that blacks did experience segregation in pretty much all walks of life. I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but we were very much aware of it. We were very much aware of the injustice of it. But this was before the more militant and non-militant civil rights struggle, and it was more or less accepted. There was a degree of asserting of one's dignity as best one could in that environment, and recognizing that what was happening was not appropriate, and but because of many of the blessings that I enjoyed, the education of my parents and general attitudes, I was very much aware, we were all very much aware, that the way we were treated was not consistent with who and what we were, and we maintained our dignity as best we could, and asserted ourselves as best we could.
Was there examples when you went to town, the local town? Was there the white restaurants, the black restaurants, the theaters, sitting in different areas?
Everything was segregated, pretty much segregated. Water fountains, we've seen the pictures of the water fountains. Right. Most of the theaters were not open to blacks. Those that were segregated, or they were black theaters in black neighborhoods. In Knoxville, we had some of those. And the small town that I lived in Kentucky, there was only one theater, but we sat in the balcony, and or we didn't go. And so no, there was nothing subtle about the segregation. Right. And the expectation of segregation. And as I say, we asserted ourselves as best we could, but it was oppressive.
Yeah. Did your mom and dad talk about it at all? Kind of the unjustness of that?
Oh, very much so. In fact, during the war, my parents actually wrote to FDR, and who knows where the letters went, but they got my father a job, a white-collar job at a military ordnance plant near Richmond at that time. It didn't begin to use his skills and talents. It was a fairly menial job, but it was a white-collar job, and it paid a lot more than school teacher salary, and they took advantage of it. And so we were aware of the struggles. We were aware of the creation of the Tuskegee Airmen. We had a friend who actually was in that program. So it was very much talked about in various ways at various times among friends. As I say, there was nothing subtle about it, and we were aware of it. And it did not damage our self-images the way it might have for less fortunate people. We felt that we were as good as anybody else, and it didn't oppress us in that way as it did some people.
Sure. VJ Day comes along in August of 1945. Do you recall any celebration in the community that the war was over?
Nothing that involved a gathering of people. Mm-hmm. There was celebration. I was celebrating to the extent that I got silly on my bicycle and fell and knocked myself in the head hard enough to go to a doctor, just being a kid.
Yeah.
What was I? And that was 45. I was 11, yeah. And I remember. I mean, it was a celebratory ambiance, if you would, but there were no demonstrations or crowds gathering in the streets.
Maybe church bells ringing or something like that?
Probably some church bells ringing. But so I do remember VJ Day very well. And I remember VE Day and as well as VJ Day. And it was in Knoxville in VE Day, and then visiting back in Richmond, not visiting, we hadn't fully moved away yet, but my father had relocated and taken a new job, so it was summertime, and we were there we weren't living there, but we were there at the time.
So the war ends, you're kind of in between those two locations, but ultimately graduate from high school in 1951.
Mm-hmm.
Were you subject to the draft?
Mm-hmm.
And did you enlist, or did you?
I registered, and then I went into ROTC.
Okay.
And I did go into the service through ROTC.
So the ROTC, and where did you go to college? Wayne, we mentioned Wayne.
Yeah, I finished Wayne. My first year in college was at HBCU at Hampton University it is now. I went there for 1 year, lived there, and it was a very good year for me developmentally. And but the next year I went to Wayne and entered into a mechanical engineering program.
That's when you became a Detroit Tiger fan.
Well, not really, because blacks didn't feel that positive toward the Detroit Tigers back then.
Well, now having researched that, yeah, they didn't have any blacks, and in fact, as I recall, Mr. Briggs, who owned it, was sort of standing firm as one of the last guys that turned out in the late 50s to actually have an integrated team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember going to any baseball games in Detroit?
No.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is I recently interviewed a 96-year-old guy in Detroit who played in the Negro Leagues for the Detroit Stars.
Mm-hmm.
He's alive.
Mm-hmm.
So you're an ROTC. Did you transfer your ROTC to Wayne? Were you?
Yes. In fact, I started an Army ROTC at Hampton and then transferred to the Air Force at Wayne and finished there. I
see you have your wings.
I do.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who was wearing his own and I expressed admiration for them, so he got me a set.
Perfect. Now, we know you're a pilot, but how did that happen?
Well, I am a pilot, but I'm not a military pilot. I was a navigator in the Air Force. They required perfect vision to start. You don't have to have perfect vision to be a pilot, but you have to have perfect vision to start training, for them to invest in you. Mm-hmm. And so I did not qualify to be a pilot trainee. I was a navigator, and I got my rating as a navigator and served in B-47s in that role, and fortunately never had to drop an atomic bomb. I'm very glad for that. But at the same time, I got my civilian pilot's license and subsequently went on to get commercial, multi-instructors, instrument, bunch of ratings.
Right. When you, back here at Wayne, and you would have graduated from Wayne, and so the Korean War probably ended by the time you got out of Wayne.
It had. During my 3 years of active duty, there were no wars.
Yeah.
There were a few scares. The Cold War was very prevalent, and we got shook up a few times, but I didn't get shot at, and I didn't have to shoot anybody or drop a bomb on anybody.
So talk about those couple of scares. Cold War, of course, for the camera. This is the post Joseph Stalin. This would have been Nikita Khrushchev time period. So tell me about how that affected you.
Well, after I completed my training, which took about a year, I was assigned at Lincoln Air Force Base and as a navigator in a B-47. And the Cold War involved a lot of saber rattling, as you undoubtedly remember, and there were some scares. There were times when we weren't quite sure how far we were away from actual mutually assured destruction, actually. Mm-hmm. So while I was with Strategic Air Command, we routinely had alerts, and we would run out to the airplanes and fire them up and play war. And but a couple of times were perhaps a little more interesting and a little more scary because I forget what triggered it, but something the Russians did or the Soviets did that we all were called. Normally we rotated on alerts, but we were all called to the base, and our families could come with us, and we were all on alert. And the announcement was made, there will be no practice alerts. So routinely we would go out and they'd sound the alarms and we'd run out to the airplane and fire up the engines or whatever, and no practice alerts. They didn't tell the guy who called the practice alerts. And of course, he called a practice alert, but he called an alert, and people were pretty shook up. We did things that we weren't supposed to do, like our weapons were secured. We prepared them to be used. Families were bawling. Families were really crying, because when you say no practice alerts and they call you out, you know, you think World War III is starting. And lots of things were done that shouldn't have been done because somebody didn't get the word, somebody didn't get the memo. And we'd have times when there were other snafus. Did you serve?
No.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, if you've been in the military, you're very familiar with the snafu phenomenon.
I've read a lot about it, and I'm
Yes.
familiar what it stands for.
Yes.
That will not be.
There's a clean version.
Yeah. We won't break it down. So you stayed in the military till when?
59.
59. Then what?
Well, I had an engineering degree. I had a few months that I worked in engineering before I got called to active duty, and so I pretty much acted like a new graduate and put out my resume lots of places and ended up with going to General Electric in Syracuse, New York, and as a civilian.
So you're in Syracuse, GE, then where does law school fit into this whole?
It comes much later.
Okay.
Much later. In fact, I took early retirement to go to law school. Yeah.
So you really spent your career at GE?
Most of my, yes, that career, almost all of it at GE.
Yeah. Then you left GE, and then was there something else after that?
Well, law school.
Okay, so that's when why did you decide that? I mean, this is at a time when people are kind of retiring or retired, you'd say, all right, I want to go to a law school. Wow.
I had, in fact, my wife and I had both talked about law school years earlier. Gee, that would be fun. And I said, you know, if I ever win the lottery, I think I'll quit work and go to law school. I didn't win the lottery, but I got to a point, my kids were through college, and my career, I felt, was stagnating somewhat. I had enjoyed it, I had a lot of good experiences, and there wasn't an opportunity to go to law school part-time, which would have been nice. I would have done it earlier if I could have gone part-time, but there really wasn't a law school convenient. Some people commuted to one some distance away. I was in Albany, New York area at that time. And some people did go to law school in Massachusetts, but I didn't want to do that. But I was in a position where I felt, gee, why not? So I got the book for the exam, and I was in Hawaii. And I'd been talking to a professor at the law school, And
What law school was this?
Albany.
Albany Law School.
And I'd been talking to this friend, and I bought the book for the exam, and in Hawaii. And I was on vacation in Hawaii, and I loved it. I was having fun. I was reading like you would read recreational reading.
Oh my golly.
I was sitting on the beach reading the book. And it really grabbed me. It grabbed me. I knew I wanted to do it. So I came back home, and I had passed the deadline to take the exam, and I talked to my friend. He said, no, he said, you can still, there's a way to do it late, and you have to call and make a reservation. And I did. I never took any kind of course. I just called and did it. They called it your walk-in, but you actually did have to call in advance, and I did that, and I got in. I took the exam, and the rest is history.
So you took the LSAT on appointment. By appointment, you took the LSAT.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Well, when you say by appointment, I'm not sure what.
No, you just, when you talk about walking in, normally you have it the two times during the year. They have the
Oh no, it was a schedule, but I was late for the schedule.
I see.
I was late applying to take the test.
Man, I got it. So you just walked in and...
So there was a separate procedure that if you made this phone call, and it wasn't easy. I called, and it was very difficult to get through it. I was in an office with a speakerphone, and back then, if you didn't talk on the phone for a while, it would cut off.
Yeah.
So imagine this little bit of humorous thing. I'm in my office. I close the door. I'm on the speakerphone. I mean, it was like 45 minutes or more for a 2-second conversation, but you had to do it. And I was afraid it would cut off. So I was saying the Greek alphabet. I was singing. I kept the electronics alive until finally somebody answered. Like I say, the conversation was less than a minute. Boom, I'm in. I had a code or something. I don't remember how they did it, but somehow that let me walk in.
You walk in,
So
without taking a preparation course.
Without even time to study.
Oh my gosh.
That was a gift. I mean, I had an aptitude that worked, that helped me out there. I mean, there's nothing I did that was all that great, but I had an aptitude for that test, and I had less than a week to read the materials that would help me prepare for it, and boom, I went in and took it.
You passed the bar, or passed the...
I did very well on it.
Very well in the LSATs. Now you're going to law school. Was there a choice, or was Albany where you wanted to go?
It was not a choice. That's where I was living, and I went there because that was convenient, and I was not really wanting to go somewhere and live temporarily for law school. And so I went to Albany. I am very glad I went to Albany, I think, and I really can't say enough about my experience in Albany. Very, very positive experience. I think it's a great school, and as important as the quality of the education, which I thought was high, is the attitude of the professors, the attitude of the student body. In some schools, they tell me it gets pretty nasty. In some schools, professors have attitudes that aren't great. It was all a very positive attitude. You felt like the professors wanted you to succeed. We helped each other. We were not cutthroat competitive. We were just the opposite. Study groups worked together. Somebody would find something that would help with a particular area, a concept, we'd share it. It was a very positive experience, and I had a ball. And it made me feel, instead of in my early 50s, it made me feel in my 20s. And so I had found the fountain of youth. So I had a ball, and I was so glad that I couldn't go to school part-time, because I've got my engineering degrees after the undergraduate. I got my advanced degrees part-time. And here I was fully immersed. I was on campus, I was interacting with my fellow students, I worked for the school, and I spent a lot of time there, and it was a whole different experience from what part-time school is.
So you're pretty senior in that class.
Yeah, I'm not the oldest one they've had, but I was up there.
Yeah. Did that impact you at all, as far as either being more mature? I know my experience at law school, several people came from Vietnam,
yep.
And they went to the War College, and they came to Dickinson with me. So we were populated with a lot of older people, and they were really smart because they were really focused.
Yeah.
And I suspect you were focused.
I was, but I intermingled with my younger colleagues much better than I would have expected, actually. I was accepted and comfortable, and really made good friends, and enjoyed the relationships. Like I say, I became 20-something with the advantage of a few years' experience and maturity, and so it was a very positive experience.
You graduated from Albany what year?
That would be 90.
Okay, so 1990, a few years earlier, there was a guy named Robert Jackson that graduated from Albany. Did that
No,
come
he
up
did
at
not.
all?
He didn't graduate from
Well,
Albany.
he attended. He attended? Yes, thank you for that John Barrett correction. And subsequently got an honorary degree. But yeah, he attended many moons earlier. But that name, was that even mentioned? He was a Supreme Court justice. Of course, he had passed away in '54. But
I'm sure I heard of him, but not to the extent I would have expected.
Yeah. So graduated 1990 from Albany, and now what did you decide to do with your law degree?
Well, I decided I didn't want to go to New York City, but I applied to a number of law firms, and in Albany and in Washington, D.C., and one in Connecticut. So I just put my resume out like any other new graduate, and I was hoping that my age wouldn't be held against me. And as luck would have it, I sprained my ankle. So this old guy that's coming in to be interviewed is going in with a cane.
Gosh, you had everything going for you.
But I still got a number of very good offers and a number of good choices, and ultimately decided to move down and work in Washington, D.C. For a law firm of Latham and Watkins.
What did they have you do?
Wide variety of stuff. They consciously wanted you to get a variety of experiences, so you did research, you did transactional, you did help with litigation. You didn't do, I was not in the courtroom, but a wide variety of stuff.
With your mechanical and engineering background, that ultimately led to, didn't you get in the area of sort of patent,
I did get into intellectual property, yes. In fact, I later went ahead and took the patent, what we referred to as the patent bar, yeah.
Realize how remarkable this is? Does it ever dawn on you what you went from being a mechanical engineer, GE, Albany Law School, Washington D.C. law firm, sort of general practice, to ultimately working your way intellectual property, the patent bar. That's as hard as it gets.
That is the worst exam I ever took.
Shiver, dog.
I just feel like I have been extremely well blessed to have all of these opportunities to be able to have all of these very positive experiences. And I have, you know, they say if you're in a job you like, you never work a day in your life. And we've all had our days that we didn't want to go to work, but generally speaking, everything I have done, I've had a ball. But the biggest transition wasn't what you recited, but going from a segregated, inferior public Southern school to engineering school. Mm. It helped me not to know what I really was getting into, because when I went to engineering school, I mean, I'm in classes with people whose uncles and fathers, and mostly men, of course, were in engineering, coming from a technical high school down the road from the university. In Detroit. And when I look back at that, that is probably the most phenomenal, and it's not to my credit. I have been blessed. And for whatever reason, I was able to make that transition to go from the high school that I went to the college that I went to, and to get an engineering degree and get into an engineering honor society. That's a blessing. That still amazes me, that I was, and it was a gift. You know, there's nothing I did, but I was able to do that. And then to have the ability to have the Air Force experience, to have the experience as a lawyer, which I just thoroughly enjoyed. Everything. I've been blessed.
So we got you down to passing the patent bar, mm-hmm. and no doubt probably practiced before the patent office?
I did not.
You did not?
I did not. The only thing you need that for is to prosecute patents. Right. And I never did that. I did do intellectual law legal work. I didn't do any patent litigation, but I've written licenses and gotten involved with copyright and patents and trademarks and so forth. I have done some legal work in those areas. I never used that particular credential, but I wanted it, and I was glad to get it, and then I went on and did other things.
Well, then you did, at some point, did you retire from the firm, or did you move on to something else?
Well, I moved to a different firm, and then I did leave that firm and went into practice as a university attorney at Howard University. And I did that for 9 years, I think it was, and then I retired.
What was your role at Howard?
I did mostly transactional work. I did a little litigation. I did win my only case in front of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. And I said, I'm never going back. You can't beat 100% record. I went once.
Remember who some of the judges were at the time when you argued? I mean, some of them went on to fame, a lot of fame and fortune.
I know. I don't remember now. I don't. But I did. But mostly, I did transactional work. I did all kinds of contracts: construction contracts, government contracts, teaching contracts, research contracts. I worked with the athletic department, did a lot of work with the athletic department. A variety of things like that. But we had people who specialized in litigation. We had people who specialized in healthcare, because Howard has a hospital. But my work was mostly in the athletics and contracts.
Then at some point you decide you're time to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Get me to Chautauqua. How does Juanita Jackson and John Jackson find their way here, which have been such an intimate part of our community for so long? But was there an aha moment for you and Juanita where you're saying, all right, there's a place up in New York?
I had heard about it. I don't think she had, but Juanita, since the mid-'70s, except for the time I was in law school, she went back to work while I was in law school because she didn't want the economic effect of my not working. So she was a volunteer. She was a professional volunteer. She was in many organizations, mostly musical. Mm-hmm. And she had a colleague who worked with her, and they became friends. And the colleague's husband was a professor at SUNY Albany and had a gig at Chautauqua as the festival orchestra, which is a student orchestra leader. And he went down, during the year, he'd go around and recruit his orchestra. And then at Chautauqua, they would perform at Chautauqua. It was one of 3 orchestras at that time in Chautauqua. And this woman and my wife became good friends, and so they invited us to come and visit at Chautauqua. And we had a very positive experience, and we laughed about it later because her words were, "We think you'll like it." And of course, we liked it very much, and it was a very positive experience, and we started coming and bringing family, and when I decided to retire from Howard, we had this long involved conversation. Like, one of us said, well, why don't we move to Chautauqua? And the other one said, yes, let's do. And we did, and that was a very positive experience. Not only at Chautauqua, but because also a number of people, and you're one of them, who went out of their way to make it a very positive experience and help us to come into a new community, an area where we were not familiar. And you sat down with me and we talked about some things and contacts that I can make that were very positive and very helpful. And so we've had no regrets.
Well, what's remarkable is that you reached out to several, I'm sure. I am blessed to have been one of them, and talk about arbitration, and opportunities to get involved in the community, not just merely sit down as a spectator, but to be somewhat proactive in the community. If you're going to be here, you should be part of it. And that was always the message that I walked away from, as to your reasons for asking, and it's been wonderful. And part of that was attending and soon becoming involved in many forms, your wife and you, in Jackson Center.
Yes.
And do you remember your first kind of impressions? I mean, or really maybe the first time you attended something there? I'm not sure I remember, but...
I don't. I'm surprised that I don't. I just know that from the get-go, I had very, very positive... I'm not even sure if I met you before I went to the Jackson Center. I imagine I did, but I'm not sure. But between knowing you and becoming friends and attending some of the really exceptional programming at the Jackson Center, it was just a natural that I would become interested in. I've always been my wife, as I said, was a professional volunteer. I, working full-time, did not volunteer at her level, but I've also been involved in community activities all of my adult life as well. And that was just love at first sight. What was being done and everything about it it grabbed me very much the way I described law school was grabbing me earlier. It was a very positive thing, and I was very flattered and very pleased to be given the opportunity to participate more fully.
And part of that more fully was, in fact, becoming a board member.
Yes.
At the Jackson Center. And Your first meeting, I remember the impression you left on a guy who had actually attended the meeting from Washington, Barrett Prettyman.
Yes.
He was very, very taken by you. There's a lot of impressions I have, but that's right up there. And so what was your sense of it all? I mean, now you're all of a sudden, we've opened up the curtain and said we invited you to come to be on the board, and now you're learning a little bit more about us. What was your impressions of us? Because now you have different eyes. You're not merely sitting in the audience.
Well, I related to the people I met. My experiences were extremely positive. I mean, that is a group of people that, you know, it's a privilege to be associated with, it's a privilege to know. And there were people, not just people whom I could admire, but people who I could become friends with. You know, people I liked, people who made me feel good. So, and what was being done was unique. It was exciting. I could really get enthusiastic about Jackson and who he was and what he did and how he performed. And I mean, this is something that can mean a lot to a lot of people. And yes, I admire the man, but to me, his life is something that can inspire anybody and all of us, whatever our attitudes, whatever our involvement, whatever our careers. The man had so much to offer between his character and his skill that the mission of the Jackson Center was just something I could really put both feet in and be fully immersed in. And the experience was very, very positive, and it still is.
Do you remember a couple of programs or initiatives that kind of stand out during your kind of time period on the board? Which do you recall when you joined the board? It was because you were on it a long time.
Yeah, I was, and there are so many programs, so many people that have been brought in, and the programs have been so well done. It's like hard to say, you know, to select which have impressed me the most, but they're experiences that of a nature that you just don't get other places and other things. And again, they usually have been very open to the public. They have been well attended. I'm less involved with, but very appreciative of the fact that the Jackson Center, what it can do for young people. I think it probably makes more of a difference for young people and what the people exposed to it are going to be like than we'll ever know. I mean, you're not going to have people who have the experience of the Jackson Center in a January 6th type activity. I just don't think it can happen. I suppose it could, but we're giving people who have no other way of getting it a perspective on society, on citizenship that is unique. So, but bringing in people from the various cases, and having them talk firsthand, it gets me excited. I think it's a wonderful thing. I do hope we can expand our footprint. And that's not easy, but, and I think we are to some extent, but No, it's been a very, very positive experience for me and a privilege to be involved as to the extent that I have.
Well, you've been involved in so many aspects of it, and operations and governance, and which we needed guidance along the way, and there was this steady hand of John Jackson throughout, and you made sure we dotted I's and crossed T's, which, and it was easy for some of us, including I raised my hand, as we're flying ahead 100 miles an hour, not to pause and to say, make sure we do this, and you were the guy. So you'll always be a guiding, you were a guiding light to make sure if John Jackson says it's okay, it's okay.
That's quite a burden there.
Take it as a compliment.
I do. I do.
Now, one of the things, John, that also, I mean, aside from this Renaissance guy that you are, but you're a lay minister.
No, I actually am a licensed minister, or at least I was.
Yeah.
A licensed minister. Actually considered clergy, because at some point after I was retired and sitting here and thinking, as I said earlier, I have been so blessed. And I thought, and I think, that I had something to offer with my efforts and with divine guidance. So I chose to become a pastor and enjoy that as well.
And have had several churches which they had meetings.
I pastored one church. I have preached at a number of churches, and I'm still working at Hurlbut as an associate. But I have been given a lot, and I am trying to give back in whatever ways I can. And the feedback I get tells me that, to God be the glory, can be a useful tool, and I've helped some people, and that's what I want to do.
You came down here today willingly. You accepted this. On your way down, did you anticipate some question or two that I have yet to ask you, John?
No, I know you always ask that question. I've heard many of your interviews, which are extraordinary, but no, I came with an open mind. I said, well, I've always enjoyed talking to Greg. I've always enjoyed hearing him talk, and I will go where this takes me. And no, I did not anticipate any particular question.
Well, let me just also say for the record and for the camera that John married Juanita Jackson. She was interviewed a few years ago at Turner School, but most importantly, she has been an incredible sidekick to you and a tremendous asset to the Jackson Center, as she has given concerts for our benefit, and she's world class. She's world class in many ways, but certainly a world class singer, and we've been the beneficiaries of that. And if she were here, I'd tell her the same thing, and so this will be on the record. You did well.
Well, all of the blessings I have told you about, she was the greatest.
Yeah.
I'm very, very fortunate.
Well, we've all been fortunate at Chautauqua that the Jacksons decided to come here, retire here, and continue to be part of the community. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Greg.